Welcome back to the channel, guys. Let's get straight into today's story. For decades, Britain has been told a comforting story about modernisation, efficiency and reform. But behind the slogans and press releases, something far more serious was happening. A quiet sell-off of the country itself, piece by piece, asset by asset. Britain's public infrastructure was transferred out of public hands and into private ownership, often with very little public debate. This wasn't one dramatic moment. There was no single vote where the country agreed to sell itself off. Instead, it happened slowly, quietly and deliberately, under different governments, through different policies, but always with the same result. Less public control, more private profit, and long-term consequences that ordinary people are still living with today. The process accelerated in the 1980s and 1990s when privatisation was sold as a cure-all. Industries that were once owned by the public, energy, water, rail, telecoms, were bought off and sold. We were told that competition would drive down prices, improve services, and reduce the burden on taxpayers. In reality, what emerged was something very different. Instead of genuine competition, many of these industries became private monopolies or tightly controlled markets. Water companies passed into foreign ownership, energy firms prioritised shareholder returns, rail services became fragmented, expensive, and unreliable, and the public, who once owned these assets collectively, were turned into customers paying endlessly for services they already paid to build. For me, what makes it even more frustrating is how little scrutiny many of these sales received at the time. Complex financial structures, long-term concessions, and regulatory loopholes meant assets were often sold at undervalued prices. Once gone, they were gone for good, locked into private hands, protected by contracts and international investment rules. And guess what? The profits didn't stay in Britain. Many of the companies running British infrastructure today are owned by overseas investors, pension funds and financial groups. British households pay their bills every month, but the money flows outward, away from public reinvestment into global financial networks. Meanwhile, when services fail, when infrastructure crumbles or when investment falls short, it's the public that feels the impact. The sell-off didn't stop at utilities. Public land, council housing, transport assets and even parts of the NHS supply chain were gradually opened up to private involvement. Not always through outright sale, sometimes through long leases, outsourcing contracts or private-public partnerships that effectively transfer control without ever using the word privatisation. This is why so many people feel something has gone wrong, even if they can't always put their finger on it. Decisions about essential services are no longer made with public interest as the primary concern. They're filtered through balance sheets, shareholder expectations and contractual obligations. Local councils, once responsible for managing assets for communities, became asset managers under pressure to sell. Short-term financial fixes were chosen over long-term stewardship. Land that could have been used for housing or public services was sold off to plug budget gaps, often very cheaply, often permanently. And once sold, these assets didn't serve communities anymore, they served returns. Supporters of privatisation often argue that government shouldn't be in the business of running services, but that argument ignores the core issue. This isn't just about efficiency, it's about ownership, accountability and control. When something goes wrong with publicly owned asset, voters can demand answers. When it goes wrong under private ownership, accountability becomes blurred, delayed or completely absent. And over time, the costs have become impossible to ignore. Rising bills, failing infrastructure, underinvestment, emergency bailouts for private operators that were supposedly meant to reduce public risk. Time and time again, the state steps in to stabilise systems that private owners have extracted value from, proving that the risk was never really transferred at all. What Britain experienced wasn't reform, it was extraction. Assets built over generations were monetised, packaged and sold. Political leaders gained short-term financial breathing room. Investors gained long-term income streams, and the public lost ownership of the foundations of everyday life. This quiet sell-off also changed the culture of governance. Instead of asking what the country needs, policymakers began asking what markets would tolerate. Instead of long-term planning, politics became transactional. The result is a country where strategic assets are fragmented, decision-making is distant and public trust has steadily eroded. And once trust is lost, it's hard to rebuild. The sell-off of Britain wasn't just an economic shift, it was a political choice, one that still shapes housing, transport, energy and public services today. And it raises a question that never really went away. Should essential national assets exist to generate profit or to serve the public? Because once you sell control, getting it back is far harder than giving it away. Thanks for watching, guys. If you want more honest political commentary and don't want to miss out what's really happening behind the headlines, hit that subscribe button and drop your thoughts in the comments below.